This house behind me really is one of the great houses of the era of the Colonial Revival, which spans from around the 1880s to around 1930, at the beginning of the Great Depression. It was a movement that would emulate the colonial houses of New England, and mostly New England, with the ones in New England, but also throughout the country. And this particular house is so unique in so many ways because of the stone facade and structure here that you see. And it's also this form, the gambrel style form, was very, very popular here on the South Coast during the colonial period from 1720 till really about 1800. Many, many farmhouses were built of wood, not of stone, in this form. In fact, if you're familiar at all, unless you're from Swansea or Somerset, there's a great house museum in Swansea called the Martin House, built in the 1720s. It looks just like this house, except it doesn't have stone, it's all shingles. But when you look at that house and you look at this house, you say, wow, the architect, whose name was Edgar Hammond, a very famous architect here in New Bedford, born in New Bedford, and he designed this house and had it built in 1897. It looks like he took that house and just made it here in stone. It has the dormers, doesn't have the same type of dormers, but dormers in the same place, the same type of gambrel, the same window placement as well. We're going to have a picture of that house on the video when it comes out. But if you wanted to see the house, you just look up the Martin House in Swansea and you'll see pictures of it and you'll say, wow, the architect either saw this house or he had a model that was very similar to this and built it to this size. It's a little bit, this is bigger, the scale is grander. This is a time when there's a lot of money here in New Bedford. This is the beginning of the tremendous growth of the textile industry here in the city, with a lot of money being made in the city. There's all sorts of things happening. This little development here was part of the James Arnold estate. It was developed in all of these houses that were built here around 1895 to 1900. You guys, we're going to talk about another one on the street, but this is one of the foundation houses in my view, design-wise. Now, the story goes that the stones on this house came from a stone wall, the local stone walls. I think actually it's true, because look at the giant stone wall, the giant stones that are in this wall. It's unbelievable, really. And when you go, I live in Westport now, and when you go up the Drift Road and all the old Main Road and all the old stone walls, you'll see they used huge stones on those. And the oldest of those stone walls have these huge stones, and here we got them all over the place. Can you imagine hauling them from wherever they hauled them from, and then to place them in these various locations on the house? Really, quite a mechanical and engineering feat, really, to get these all to look this way. Great house. This color, the painted colors, this green is very, very, sometimes referred to as Narragansett green. Very, very popular color on Colonial Revival's arts and crafts houses during this time. Just a great building. Still a single family, thank God, but a great building. This house here is to me anyway, one of the really gems of this neighborhood and this style. Another Colonial Revival house. Now, contrary to the one we just saw, the Colonial Revival mostly had the architects were taking elements of the Colonial Revival and then building them to suit, their design ideas. So this house doesn't look like anything that actually existed during the colonial period, but all the features do. You can see on the end the big giant gambrel on the end. So actually, there's 4 gambrels here in this house as design. But the thing about this house, to me, during this period when the textile industry was growing like crazy and money was coming in, there was a tremendous need for executive housing. There was plenty of money to build the houses, and there was plenty of people to buy the houses, but there wasn't that much land to put the houses on. So you have these magnificent mansions. And this one is, in particular, is a prime example of the house is way too big for the lot. It has beautiful designs on either end. If you walk down, again, you see that fabulous Palladian window on that side. There's ornamentation all over this house. But the front facade really is the only place that gets viewed. And you can see all the detailing they put in this house. You have these great urns. You have there's another swan neck in the dormers. You can't see it too well. Let's just go by the trees. I mean, there's lots of detail in this house. I've been in this house. The front hallway here is a big, wide, very airy, absolutely beautiful, magnificent spaces in this particular building. Unfortunately, it's on a postage stamp sized lot. So, the only thing you really see and can appreciate is the front. And that's the big problem with houses in New Bedford during this time period, is lot size. Very, very few of the houses that are built during this time, big giant mansions, had the lots to suit them. Actually, every house in this block is really kind of squeezed in here. And when you think 1897, there should have been more room. But that wasn't the case. They were coming up, they were being built all over in this particular house, which is really a beauty. Again, about 1895, 1897, this house was built. There were Providence architects, Angel and Swift, that designed this house. It's a little bit different design from a lot of the houses here in New Bedford. It has a little bit different look to it, but nonetheless, a real beauty. And if you have a chance, one of those Palladian windows is on this side as well. You'll see how much detail I put all over the house, even though the front was really the only place that was going to be seen. This is one of New Bedford's residential gems. This development, it's called Clinton Place. It was conceived in 1897 and 98 by the owner of the house in front, which is the big Victorian. He decided he would develop this lot back here into income housing. So he hired a man by the name of Nathaniel Smith, who was one of New Bedford's most famous native-born architects, to design the houses for the site. And he did really a magnificent job of designing 6 very unique buildings on this European-styled cul-de-sac. Each house is quite different. The interiors, actually, each house is very different. The interiors are all kind of very different from one another. We have a couple of residents here who are on the tour tonight over here. If you want to know more about their houses, not to be prejudicial, but Jane's house is right here, and number 2, I think it is. And this is really, to me, one of the more, the floor plan is pretty much like you'd think it would be. It's sort of modern, very, very pleasant to be in. Lots of the other floor plans are very odd, actually, I find. I've never been in the green one, actually, so I don't know about that one for sure. But I've been in the others, and they're a little odd, actually. They're kind of, you'd have to get used to them, I think. The one in the back, number 6, is in particular, is very narrow. It's been added on in the front here. Over to the left, you can see that a few years ago, one of the owners put an addition on, which kind of changed the look of the house dramatically, really. I mean, architecturally, I think the purists would have said, that house didn't look like that, blah, blah, blah. But it certainly made it more livable. Because when you went into the main door right here, and in the other rooms, you took just a few steps and you were out the back door. It's very unusual. It's an A-frame. It was very narrow. There was multiple floors. And when I went in that house, I thought, this is the most unusual interior I've ever been in. But nonetheless, each of the houses is beautiful, unique. The plot the houses have always been well cared for. Even though these were built as rental properties, some of the richest people in the city that were coming to the city to work in the textile industry lived in these houses. They rented these houses. And so this was a primary spot to live in. Now, the big downside to the site is obviously what? Parking, right? 1897, this is when it was built and developed. Now, automobiles were a novelty in 1897. The horseless carriages, was still very skeptical, but that wouldn't last long. Unfortunately, it was just for this site. It was, it was a little bit too early to anticipate the automobile, because within 10 years, the automobile was a big deal. And a lot of cars there were so many cars registered in Bedford 10 years later that they had a separate listing for everybody who owned an automobile in the back of the directory. And there were hundreds of people, or thousands maybe, that owned cars, and there were hundreds of makes. Hundreds of makes. Now we have, what, maybe 20, 30 makes around the world. Well, at that time, there was hundreds of makes, but everybody had a car. A lot of the richer people had 4 or 5 cars. Not that they drove them. They had people to drive them for them. But it changed dramatically. But this preceded the auto age just a little bit too much. And so it's still kind of a problem for those people who live here. We've been doing these tours for the last 6 years. And Steve has been videotaping our tours. And this house has appeared probably on nearly all of the tours. Because every time we walk by, you just can't walk by because there's always people who haven't been on the tours, and they say, wait a minute now, what are we doing walking by this house? This is really New Bedford's most famous and respected residential property. It's the William J. Rotch Gothic Revival Cottage, built in 1846. Now, a little bit about Rotch. The Rotch family was very, very important here in the early history of New Bedford. They're the ones that brought the whaling industry, the commercial whaling industry, to New Bedford in the years just prior to the American Revolution in the 1760s. A series of Williams Rotches were important, very important people. The house that we're going to finish the tour at is a William Rotch house, William Rotch Jr. So this would have been his I don't know, great grandson or something like that. He was born in 1819, became really one of New Bedford's most prominent citizens. And when he got married, he went on honeymoon in the Hudson River Valley, up the river near Rhinebeck and some of those towns that are just maybe 20, 30, 40 miles up the river from Manhattan. And there were a lot of these styles of this house in that area. If you've ever seen Lyndhurst in Tarrytown, very, very important building in the Gothic Revival, same architect. His name was Alexander Jackson Davis. He was the key man who was building and designing buildings of this style during that time. And this here was designed for him at that time. And it really became the architect's calling card house. It was a beautiful design, beautifully balanced, lots of details. It was all the hallmarks of the style, the big arches, the oriel window here, all that gingerbread or barge boards in the gables and so forth. I mean, everything's done in spades here, but a very balanced house as well. This house was owned by the family for it's almost its entire history. It was only, I think, in the last 15 years that they finally sold it. But it has landmark status. You see this plaque right here. Landmark status is the highest honor that a property can get in this country. Landmark status. A few landmark buildings here in New Bedford: the Siemens Bethel, the Frederick Douglass House, and RJD. There may be another one as well, but I think those 4 are our landmark buildings here in New Bedford. This is one of them. Beautiful house. Rotch had a big family. He had 6 or 7 kids here, and he outgrew the house. And he ended up getting in the will of the man at the Wamsutta Club, or the James Arnold Mansion. He died. James Arnold willed the house to him because he needed more room for his family. It's a big house. It's probably not as big as some of the other big Victorians in house, but still a big house, but it wasn't big enough for his family, and he actually put an addition on the house. If you go on to Cottage Street, you'll see this shingle style Gothic house, and that was an addition to this house. Now, in 1906, again, talking about lot size and the demand for executive housing and so forth, this was an estate that went from Orchard Street to Cottage Street. And rather than demolish the building and redevelop the site, they just moved the house. They moved this house from about where that tree is behind us. It was, over there someplace, moved it 50 feet this way. They detached the addition and made it a separate house on Cottage Street. And then they built all these houses after 1906. Because again, there was such a need for housing, for mansion housing for executives. Now, to show the growth of New Bedford, in 1890, New Bedford had 40,000 people lived and there was quite a few mill workers at that time. There was about 10,000 people working in the mills of New Bedford in 1890. By 1920, there was 120,000 people living in New Bedford. 80,000 people moved to the city in 30 years. And 35,000 of those worked in the textile industry. But there was a lot of people that came from all over to work in the textile industry, to develop businesses and so forth. The economy of the city can't even be imagined compared to today. It was a huge, huge economy in the city, and it was growing like crazy during the early years of the 20th century. This is the William Rotch Rodman house. William Rodman was a son of one of the early founders of the whaling industry here in New Bedford. He made really so much money in all sorts of things. Primarily, it was always the whaling industry, which was their foundation, source of wealth. But people like William Rodman had investments all over the place. They owned sheep farms in Australia, and they owned hotels in New Orleans and stuff. I mean, they were just international businessmen, really. But whaling was always their primary source of income. When everything else failed, they could go back to whaling, and that's basically what happened to Rodman. But he had so much money that in the 1830s, he built this magnificent mansion. Really, at the time, it was considered one of the greatest mansions in New England. It cost $60,000 to build in the 1830s, which doesn't sound like that much now, but it was a king's ransom in those days. And the house is so great to me for so many reasons, other than its grandeur, and it's a great house, and it symbolizes the textile industry, has this great view right at the end of Hawthorne Street. You know, lots of people see this house. It's just a great symbol of the grandeur that was New Bedford during the whaling era. Now, there's been a lot of people. The architect of this building was a man named Russell Warren. Warren did lots of buildings, big buildings in the city, the Double Bank building down in the historic district, the public library downtown, the house across the street, the Grinnell Mansion, the big stone mansion across the street, and lots of other mansions that have long gone. The house is beautiful. It's beautiful inside. It has been remodeled quite a few times over the years. The architect Nat Smith, in fact, was hired by a textile tycoon in New Bedford by the name of J. Frank Knowles. Knowles bought the building in the early 1900s and hired Smith to do a remodel. So the remodel is on, most of his remodel is on the first floor here. When you walk, if you've been in here, because actually my insurance people work in this building, Paul and Dixon, so I've been in this building a lot. And when you look at the floor, I said, boy, this mosaic floor looks just like the library. That's because Nat Smith was designing both buildings at the same time, redesigning both buildings at the same time. And he designed, you can see it if you peek in, and I'm sure they won't mind you peeking in. He has this great split stairwell in the back of the first floor. It's like Tara from Gone with the Wind, you know. Fabulous split stairwell and a gigantic Palladian window, you know, that faces the door. Really a magnificent space. J. Frank Knowles, actually, the project was finished in 1909, the design and the construction, and then Knowles died before he got to ever live in the house. And then a textile tycoon named Walter Langshaw purchased the house, and he did some more things. He put the third floor on, and he put there's a back end. When you look at the house from the side, you could see there was an addition to the back, and that was done in 1919. So they've had some adjustments to the house, but it still is a magnificent building. Although, as you can see, these columns are falling apart. The original wood columns, these are the original wood, because they were never stone. They didn't use granite for these columns. You'd think they might have, but the Grinnell Mansion also had wood columns. The Double Bank building has wood columns. If you're familiar with the arcade in Providence, the arcade in Providence was designed by Warren as well. and they have the gigantic granite columns holding those up. But we always had wood columns here. They look nice, except when they start to fall apart. Thank you all for coming. Great job.